Well, good afternoon. I'm Scott Gabbard with Purdue Farm, and here with us today is Dr. Shaun Casteel, the Purdue Soybean Specialist for Purdue University in the state of Indiana. Shaun, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Scott. I enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you.
So we'll start with an easy one. How did 2025 go?
Yeah, 25, we had quite a range in terms of field conditions during the growing season. I always like to start the planting side of it. And so we had some good earlier plantings. That's been a trend for our growers over the last number of years. Unfortunately, I think some of our southern growers caught a lot of rains and not able to move the needle on their March to April plantings. And so they were definitely behind the eight ball in terms of their normal pace. And then we have some of our growers in the southeast that just continue to get rains, and an inch rain down there feels like 4 inches in some of those fields. I call them the crawdad soils. And so certainly had some of those delays that frustrated us agronomists as well as the farmers themselves. But all in all, the whole state wrapped up with a pretty good yield, above yield trend, not a record, but a really good year in terms of that. I'll also go to the flip of this, right? The tale of two seasons, where I was coming back from Wisconsin in June, and drought was really setting in the northwest part of the state. And so I remember driving across Kankakee and over to the wheat field and those areas. And so have a lot of fields burning up already in June. So those yield levels were definitely compromised with some of those conditions. And a lot of that drought condition continued all through fall and even this winter until the last few weeks. I need to look at the map, but we certainly have had some dry conditions. The one that hit us is the frustrating harvest period, right? Is whenever we have 6 or 7 weeks of dry conditions, which is great because you can shut down the machine and it's like, no, I don't have to push it. I can go to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock instead of midnight or 1. But what's kind of the raw side of that is that we're cutting 8, 9, 10% moisture. So we're losing a lot of water weight. So unfortunately, we had some of that going on this year. That's about the second year we've had that in a row. So all in all, though, with some of the planting date differences and some of the droughty conditions, we fared fairly well.
Is there anything for 2025 you'd like to share with regard to some of your work that you've done with you and your students and others through the system?
Yeah. So in 25, this was one that we did a lot of sunsetting of trials, and some of the new ones that are in the process as well. And so one I was really excited about 3 years ago. I was noticing some differences in SDS control with some of our sulfur trials. And so Darcy and I started doing some purposeful looking at SDS where she's inoculating as they planned, and we're coming over the top with sulfur treatments. And so we were able to document over the last couple of years that when we had SDS infection that was hitting us 2, 4, or 5 bushel, our sulfur treatments brought that back. In other words, we were seeing some level of suppression of SDS with sulfur. So that's kind of a nice new twist to the sulfur story in soybeans. And this is outside of just the fields that need sulfur because they're sulfur deficient or because they're earlier plantings and they're sulfur immobilization. So that's kind of a nice new one coming out of the gate. Over the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've noticed a lot of residue, and so trying to think about corn residue management, and last year in particular I had a field that I was able to track a little bit. And the first question was, okay, do I need to do any replanting or overseeding because the stand's a little subpar? And it wasn't horrible. It was 85,000 plants versus 95 to 100,000 on the other side of the fence, so to speak. And what ended up happening in 24, corn crop was really good, around about 280, but the tail fin didn't have a power tail fin, and so you basically have a windrow of corn residue right behind the combine versus the remaining 20 feet of the head that has less residue. And so what was interesting in tracking that, they're delayed in development, whether that's just now the mat layer that's creating cooler wet conditions or limited sulfur supply. All that to say, whenever we brought the combine across, and I brought my small combine, because when you bring a 30 or 40 foot head going across there, that just averages out and you're not going to see this. Where I went right behind where that windrow was, essentially. Well, it was about 69 bushel beans versus the less residue, the edge of that old corn pass, that 12 row pass, was running 80. So it's 11 bushel swing between residue management or the level of residue that was there. So that's something I really want to make sure people are aware of, especially as they go into planting season right now. Okay, can't do much about the corn harvest of 25, but make sure you're setting up good soil seed contact, whether you need some row cleaners or think about, okay, that might be a place where I had high yielding corn, a lot of residue. Maybe that is a sulfur play I want to look at. But as well as fall of 26 corn harvest, let's do a really good job of getting that corn harvest and spreading that residue so we can manage it on the soybean crop of 27.
They always say that soils have memory, and so does the crop for that regard. So that's
Sure.
pretty cool. It's like when we went in, the difference between looking at a yield map versus maybe some drone imagery to where you
Yep.
can see in between the rows or things that simply get averaged out because of how things are set up.
That's one of the things with the drones. So I first jumped into drones just for imagery in 2017. And that was one of the things I really like about drone and imagery is to fly soybean fields near the end of the season. So right as we're starting to senesce, so August, September, depending on your planting conditions and field conditions and all that, I really like then so we can say, okay, got some leaves dropping, some not. Then that's where precision agriculture comes back because then we can really see what pockets of the field were an issue. And so whether that's inherently the Swiss cheese fields that we can get down in the southeast where there's these pockets when if you put a soil auger down 30 inches, 32 inches, 36, you catch these more restrictive layers versus some that's just 5 feet over that look great and they're down to 36 or 38 or 40 inches. So that shows up as a plant as that indicator. So I like that. I echo the same thing. Photos with UAV or planes for that matter would do a really good job of telling us what field conditions we're under.
So going into 26, of course, and actually we're days, if not a couple of weeks from things that start rolling through the state. If they're by the time this gets on YouTube, I'm sure things will be in the field by then, depending on this weather that's currently going through. But we need to talk a little bit probably about input costs and things like that, and some things that maybe farmers should focus on if they have to make cuts, and then maybe just general practices as far as make the best of what you got in 2026, especially with the tight margins that we have.
Yeah, so I'll kind of approach that in both ways, both what to cut and what to make sure you don't cut, right? I call them solid foundations, right? I give high yield management talks all the time, and they can be twisted to what's a profitable production. And that's in the back of my mind anyway when I make these kind of comments and recommendations. But don't shortchange yourself on planting dates. That yield effect is real. That's been around for a while. We don't want to slap them in the ground and just have open seed slots. We can get away with that if we get some timely rains, but I'd prefer not doing that because you can get hit pretty hard. But timely plantings, and so timely plantings, depending on where you're at, southern Indiana, if they haven't caught the rains, that's now, right, to early April. Usually mid-April is a good spot, but there's going to be some other fields that let's make sure we're pulling the trigger. Soybeans can handle these timely or earlier plantings better than corn. It sounds counter from what we all grew up with kind of thing, but let's not miss out on that yield opportunity there. When you're doing that, make sure you've got that seed protected. In particular, you think about cooler, wet conditions. So whether that's going to be a Pythium Phytophthora type situation or SDS, manage that. I think we can cut on the insecticide seed treatment. I've yet to really see that play out. It's not going to be if you're the first one out. You're certainly going to be the first one at the buffet table if there is any bean leaf beetles or anything else out there. But the amount of damage, if there is quite small and is not yield impacting. So that's an area that I think we definitely can cut back on. Seed rates are a natural one. The beans can adapt, especially if you got a little bit earlier planting date. So then you've got more ability for time to take over. 100,000 plants easy. We've seen 85,000 plants yield just as well. Now, am I going to go out and seed at 100,000? Probably not. But I would be fine to around 120. Depends on the seed lot, good germ score. If you've gone and done the extra level of, okay, what's the vigor rating? So going into accelerated aging or cold germ, especially earlier planting dates, those are a nice combination to get the yield advantage with timely planting, get the variety that can grow and develop vigorously within that cooler condition, as well as it's protected. A lot of this upfront things that set the stage, the foundation. The other things that have probably already been made, that decision of, okay, our main fertility of P and K, a lot of our dry. So I think a lot of people said, I've been building, I've got enough, I can withstand a year and let it go. And I'm fine with that. I have no problems with that. If you're on the edge, you can probably even kind of dice that a little bit. It's like my close to critical level. It's about probabilities. And there's going to be years that you're going to be right at 20 or 21 parts per million phosphorus as an example. And that's like, I should probably put a little bit out there. But if it's lean time, you can probably still get by. Maybe not the best, but another approach is go take leaf samples once or twice during the growing season to kind of confirm, yep, that was a good decision. There's some good critical levels out there, or no, we probably need to make sure we hit that this fall and try to price it and catch the fertilizer price that matches up. The other one, we've had biologicals for a number of years. I just don't see that playing out as here's a consistent responder. So that's one I would definitely probably cut. Think about some of the foliar protection, R3, R4s. There's a lot of fields that need it, and there's a lot of fields that don't. So let's go out and get our boots on the ground and see if we really need to have some level of protection of disease or insects. And the last one, as much as we can, be timely as harvest, so we're not losing out on 2-3% water weight.
Backing up just real quick, when you were talking about going out and taking foliar leaf samples, I assume it's the uppermost mature trifoliate, so probably third, fourth note down.
Yep.
Taking those samples in, take the stems off, send them in to, we usually ship our stuff, I believe, to A&L Labs. I don't know if, I'm sure other sites do it as well. But what are some of those critical times that they should be out there and maybe send those in so that way they can potentially do a foliar or a rescue type treatment if necessary?
Yeah, so I normally like 2 or 3 samplings because depending on field conditions when you sample, I can almost guarantee if you want to have a potassium deficiency, take it in the middle of the afternoon on a field that's drought stressed. If you see any level of leaves are flipping over, I guarantee you I'm going to create a situation where you need potassium. Well, that's a temporary. So first, let's take multiple ones to kind of see the trend, right? I normally like R1. Sometimes you can push a little bit earlier, V4, V5. That V4, V5, depending on field conditions, can be a little misleading sometimes because some of the fields are still transitioning fully to all the nitrogen and nodulation supply. And so those could often come back nitrogen deficient. So they're just on the touch early. But if you know that going into it, that's probably still not bad to at least have that one. R1, certainly, when you start to have the first flower, that's a point where I want to start. And then you can come back again at R3, R4, and just kind of say in the middle of this linear growth phase during this fast vegetative and reproductive phase, these are good points to see how does that crop look.
Very good. So I know that we've already kind of talked about 2026 quite a bit, but is there anything else as far as a jump start for them moving forward?
Well, I think it's what we're all doing. You had 75, 80-degree weather earlier this week, and so we're all pretty itchy. So let's make sure that the itchy trigger finger is backed up with equipment that's ready for it, right? And so here's the case, right? I'm coming into the 26 season with a team purchase of a new planter, so we can really get into some of this residue issues that I've talked about. And so we're going to approach it multiple ways, from the technology on the equipment side to fertility, down pressures, and I think active down pressures, as well as row cleaners and closing wheels and all of that. Well, let's go and take the time to make sure it's working as best it can now. So then when we have that 12-hour window to plant in April 10th, we can do that.
Very good. And yeah, and always I always call it go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
You go slow at the very beginning, so that way you can really start rolling things out versus having to redo things. Never fun time.
No, whenever you mash down on that drag strips pedal and then the parachute comes out immediately, that's never a good day.
Exactly. So for those that aren't aware, if they want to find a lot of your information, the easiest way in the person's URL on their computer or on the phone is do purdue.ag/soybean station. That's where you'll get Shaun's and his team's up-to-date information and research and a lot of their findings. So once again, that's purdue.ag/soybean station. And of course, ours is purdue.ag/on the farm. Any place else, Shaun, that they could get updates from yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the web's always going to be good. So you Google anything Purdue soybean, you're going to get there. So whether that's on X, Dan and I have the Purdue crop chat that we do in association with Hoosier Ag Today. So the growing season's here. We don't normally do about once a month during the off season, and then during the growing season, it's about every couple of weeks. So we kind of share what we're seeing, questions that we're having, and hopefully answer anything that's on your mind or make you aware of something to be on the lookout for.
And for folks who haven't listened to it yet, it's also quite entertaining, especially as we hear the big fight between big corn and big soy as far as which crop is best, and it's quite entertaining in that regard. So
yeah,
Shaun,
we know which one makes money for us, so I'll just leave it at that.
Shaun, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it very much, and be safe out there. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.